That's what Katie Pavlich is diving in tonight in her show. Hi, Katie.
Indeed, and Hassan Piker is a top surrogate for DSA, so we'll be asking our guests about his statements and much more. We have Fidel Castro's daughter on as well to respond to this news story.
Yeah, she knows a thing or two about what socialism actually does.
She may know a few things about what this may do in the history that we've seen it, but interested to see what the DSA has to say as well, given that they're an older organization that has seen a resurgence in recent months, certainly at the ballot box. So we will get into all of it. Great to see you, Leland.
Have a great show, Katie.
Well, hello and welcome to Katie Pavlich Tonight. Well, we have a different kind of show planned for you tonight, one where we spend the whole hour taking a closer look at the Democratic Socialists of America, or the DSA as we have come to know it. The DSA is a growing movement, one that seems to be gaining more traction and becoming more powerful by the day. But what exactly is it? And is it anything like socialism and communism we've seen across the world in the past century? We'll talk to its top representatives, its supporters, and people who have left the movement. We'll also talk to people who have lived under communism disguised as socialism, including the daughter of Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. We'll begin tonight with what the DSA stands for. It just rolled out a new platform last week, and it has 5 key objectives. 1, government ownership of private corporations. 2, quote, free education, including college. 3, government rent control and state-run health care. 4, reparations for slavery, and 5, amnesty for all illegal aliens. Those are just the top 5. There are more objectives like abolishing ICE, abolishing prisons, abolishing the Supreme Court, abolishing the Senate. We'll get into all of that. This is the DSA's policy vision heading into the November midterms. And more than 35 DSA-backed candidates have already won their primaries across the country, creating an identity crisis for the Democrat Party. But this isn't a new movement in America. The DSA organization, as what we see today, was formed back in 1982 through a merger between the anti-Vietnam War Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee and the New American Movement. And after struggling through the conservative victories of the 1980s, which brought about the end of the Soviet Union, DSA began a new period of growth in 2014 with Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders brought democratic socialism and the renormalization of communism to the mainstream during his 2016 presidential run, of course. And by 2017, the DSA claimed 24,000 members. Today, that number has skyrocketed to more than 120,000 members, calling for an end to capitalism, sometimes violently, and fleecing taxpayers. Digging deeper, those members are overwhelmingly college educated, but not particularly well off. And recent polling shows some voters are more likely to support a Democratic Socialist candidate over a MAGA candidate endorsed by Trump, although capitalism still wins out with a majority of voters. So to make sense of it all, we are now joined by Grace Mauser, New York City DSA co-chair, and Bhaskar Sankara, author of the Socialist Manifesto and president of The Nation magazine. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time to let us know what DSA is all about for people who are curious or may not know the details. So, Bhaskar, let's start with you. Let's start with what we laid out with the DSA platform, the new platform. Of course, new taxes. We've heard about wanting a Green New Deal, passed through the legislative process. Those are kind of normal policy positions we've seen over the last 10 years. But abolishing the Senate and the presidency and the Supreme Court, how do you plan to eliminate those institutions constitutionally, given they are branches of our current government?
Well, I think that it's long been a demand of not just democratic socialists, but progressives all around the world to live in a more parliamentary democracy, democracy where we aren't such an outlier among the world's countries. So if you look at the DSA's proposal for what the structure of a state should be, I just want to be clear, it looks something like the House of Commons dominated United Kingdom. You know, this isn't some sort of authoritarian leap into a one-party state. This is just like a more parliamentary vision of a republic. Obviously, certain things like abolishing the Senate is very tricky constitutionally. There would obviously need to be some sort of constitutional convention. These are far-reaching demands. There's other considerations like the Article 5, which would require a wide swath of consent to do this, but there's ways I think that we can erode what I personally see, and I know a lot of DSAers see it as the undemocratic power of the Senate through measures short of abolition as well in the short term.
So just to follow up on that, I mean, the founders of this country in 1776 adopted a constitutional republic, not a representative democracy. They particularly set up the Senate to have a republic representation so that wasn't majority rule. So are you advocating that their vision for the future of the country be thrown out for something new?
That's absolutely incorrect. The Constitution was not established in 1776. 1776 was when we laid out the broad vision for the United States, and that was a vision.
They wanted a constitutional republic in 1776.
We experimented with many different forms of governance before landing on the Constitution. What we decided in 1776 was that we wanted to live in a country that embodied Enlightenment principles with liberty, with justice, with the pursuit of happiness. And there's many different forms that a government can take. I think we could all agree as Americans that that government should be both democratic in some form, but also should have Republican protections. So in other words, I believe deeply in the Bill of Rights, for example. So I just want to, again, push back on a certain narrative, which I'm not saying you're saying that socialists want to get rid of everything that's good in the U.S., every protection that ordinary Americans have from the state. I think we always will need some sort of balance between democracy and rule by the majority and protection for minorities and protection for individual liberties. So of course I agree on that point.
Yeah, that was why we have a constitutional republic, not a straight democracy where majority rule takes away the rights of the minority, which seems like you're proposing if you were to get rid of the Senate. But we'll move on. We'll move on. I want to get Grace in here.
Is a Republican platform.
Okay. Grace, on a call recently launching the DSA's 2026 platform, Michaela Brangan said that part of the endorsement process included candidates endorsing these policy proposals, which we just discussed. So as you move forward, is there any concern within DSA that candidates co-signing things like abolishing the Supreme Court and the U.S. Senate are too far left, at least in this moment, to win over moderates and independents nationally?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a really common media narrative that we've been hearing again and again. But I think if you talk to regular people, they know that something's extremely broken with our political system, and they want to change it. And this is true across the political spectrum. No one who learned about the U.S. government in our government classes in middle and high school is actually satisfied and feels like what is written in the Constitution is working for them in reality. So we want to try some new things. Yes, we expect our candidates that we endorse to embrace those ideas just as any organization would and should. And we know from talking directly to voters that they are dissatisfied too with the state of politics and the economy. So we're offering a new vision, and more people are getting on board.
It's interesting you both have mentioned the UK. We just had America's 250th birthday. I don't know why we would leave the UK just to go back to the same system that they have currently in place in their parliament, but that's another discussion. Bhaskar, do you think that voters supporting the DSA are actively in favor of more in this platform, which includes defunding police and prisons, or do you think that they like the idea of voting for more socialist, quote-free stuff that you guys are calling for in terms of what you don't want to have to be funded by personal means, but rather through the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, let's say someone could be a libertarian and only agree with 80 or 90% of the libertarian platform. I personally am not in favor of defunding the police, but I am in favor of the overall vision laid out by the Democratic Socialists of America, which is to say, what is the point of having a police and prison system? Is it not to deter crime and also to rehabilitate people, to bring people back into society? I think we could all look at our prison system and say that we often are taking people who have committed crimes, but turning them into far more hardened criminals who have no recourse when they get out of prison, no easy avenue, at least, back into normal life. So I think there are certain of these issues that if we take the most extreme form of the rhetoric, or I'm not saying you're doing this, but sort of the most extreme sort of rendering, it seems like something scary to people. But I think what ordinary candidates, and this is why DSA candidates are winning all over the country, are saying is that, listen, the old way isn't working. We need to rethink the way in which we handle our prisons, for instance. And I think that is a noble goal, though obviously we need to get into the policy nitty-gritty of all these issues.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, that extreme narrative isn't coming from people opposed to DSA. It's coming from people inside DSA actively saying, during your organizing meetings that we want to abolish prisons. So I understand that you don't agree with everything that a party has to offer, but that's coming from inside of the organization you're a part of.
If I could jump in here, I would take a page out of Senator Sanders' handbook and say that the radical thing is not the idea that we should decrease our incarcerated population. The radical position is that America should have the most people in prison of any country in modern history, which is the current state of affairs. And I think if you ask most Americans if they think that is not only fiscally responsible, but morally conscionable, they would say no.
Okay. I think lots of Americans would say they want violent crime to be reduced and that they want criminals to commit that to be in prison.
But I don't think they want to have the highest number of prisons of any country in modern history, and that's what we want to do.
All right. So let's move to Hasan Piker, who, of course, is one of your top campaign surrogates. He's been campaigning for DSA candidates in New York City and all over the country. He also just started displaying a newspaper from September 12th, 2001, in the background of his stream showing the Twin Towers engulfed in flames. So as one of the loudest pro-DSA voices, is this something that your movement represents?
Hasan is a shock jock, and he is a very successful one that has brought a lot of young people who are disaffected, who spend a lot of time online, into a movement that actually connects them with their politics and with real action that they can take at the ballot box and talking to their neighbors. So I'm not in the business of defending the views of every single one of our 120,000 members, but I think he's speaking to a real anger that people feel, and that we are turning into something that is a democratic revolution. And I want to emphasize the democratic aspect. We in no way endorse any sort of violent overthrow, and we are winning at the ballot box because of the vision that we have put forward.
So just to follow up on that, as a DSA co-chair with one of your top surrogates, Hasan Piker, who is at all of the parties when your candidates win, he's been campaigning in Michigan for your Senate candidate. You can't just say what he said about murdering capitalists and watching their blood run in the streets is wrong and not part of what DSA stands for?
I mean, I just said we would never endorse violence.
But particularly him and what he has said about this and murdering capitalists, millions of Americans who believe in capitalism across the country.
I'm pretty sure I very clearly answered your question. We would never
endorse... It's a yes
endorse...
or no question.
What is the question? If I endorse what he said?
Do you endorse what he said?
Okay,
great.
He's endorsing violence, but it's also a shock jock. And I think you're plenty familiar with the role those play in the media ecosystem.
So he's endorsing violence, but he's still welcome to campaign with your candidates in races across the country.
We really value the platform that he brings and the viewers that he brings, yes, and the anger that he speaks to, and he turns that into something productive.
Okay,
If I could jump in just on the Hasan point, I do think that Hasan Piker is often speaking to people who are quite angry, who are out on the fringes of the political movement, and he's telling them, even if his rhetoric, and again, it's hard to, I'm trusting you on the context, but he's often telling these people that actually there's a route to your anger that's through constructive
He's certainly giving them a route.
Through democratic politics, through campaigning for candidates with quite boring demands like Medicare for all and other demands like that. And I think the corollary is on the right. I don't condemn the Trump supporters from Republican Party for not condemning every single member of their
He's a top surrogate. We have to move on. We got a lot to get to. And I really appreciate both of you being here and explaining and answering the questions. Bhaskar Sankara, thank you for joining us. And Grace, stay with us. We will hear from two other guests and get your reaction to them in just a second. So you may have heard of an online personality named Hasan Piker. We just talked about him. He's quickly becoming one of the biggest mouthpieces for the DSA. And lately, he has nothing but praise for China's chairman Mao. Piker says Mao changed the entire planet. Others say he did so by enacting policies that led to the deaths of tens of millions of Chinese people. We wanted to talk to people who have had direct experience living under socialism and communism. So joining us now is Xi Van Fleet, who lived under Mao and is the author of Mao's America, and Alina Fernandez Revuelta, Fidel Castro's daughter and a Cuba anti-communist activist. Thank you both for being here. So Xi, let's start with you. When you hear commentators like Hasan Piker with massive young audience praising figures like Mao as someone who changed the world for the better, what are your concerns about that narrative?
It's just totally disgusting. And he is a communist, and we all know about it. But he is a communist who knows very little about real communism. He thought, and he said that, oh, there's some excesses. Yeah, it's just 18 million people, no big deal. But he also had no idea that Mao killed more communists than any other communist leader. Mao killed so many communists. Actually, the Cultural Revolution is Mao's inquisition, absolutely killed and or persecuted most of his comrades. And then the second, the number 2 person of the Communist Party in China was the president of China. He was persecuted to death by Mao because Mao considered him a rival. So I just want to Hassan Piker to know. He will be the first one to go if he leads under Mao. Because he has he's just too opinionated and he's rich. That's enough for him to be considered the enemy of the state.
Well, Mao killed so many people that he actually lowered the life expectancy rate for the entire planet for the period of a decade, which is just astonishing. But Alina, what are your thoughts when you hear DSA more generally talking about this type of democratic socialism? As you know better than anyone else, the Castro regime promised socialism and ended up with 8,000 firing squad executions and not letting people leave the island.
Well, that speech is the typical one. You know, communism, they try to turn people against people. It's always like that. You are a traitor if you don't think alike. You are in jail if you express yourself like he's doing so violently. But actually, in communist society, that's what they do. They encourage confrontation. They encourage violence among the same people. Cubans against Cubans, Chinese against Chinese, family against family. It's terrible. And it's very upsetting to see that something is very wrong in the educational system in this country when people really don't know who Mao Zedong was or who Stalin was or who Fidel Castro was.
So, Alina, just a follow-up on that, you know, for the DSA leaders who say, look, we're an organization that is all about making sure that people who have issues with the current economy, who don't think the current political system is working for them, and therefore we should change it, and this is our outline of how we can do that with our platform. What is your response to them saying we're offering policy solutions through a democratic process? This isn't communism like you're talking about from Cuba.
It is. People get attached to things where they're promised for free. And, you know, these regimes have the legend that education and healthcare is for free. But what you don't know is that you get a salary of maybe $10 a month. That's generous. And if you go to a grocery store in one of those countries, you have the same prices that the grocery store here in the United States. It's so abusive, it's so inhuman, it's so humiliating for society that I cannot describe it in such a short period of time.
Well,
I don't have the eloquence.
We'll have you back to talk about it because this issue is certainly not going away, especially in this election cycle. But Xi, I heard you, or I saw you nodding your head when Alina was speaking. What did you want to say about what she said?
Yeah, I can, of course, add to it, but I also want to address what the two guests before you talk about prison. I think that China itself is a big prison. Let's make it clear. And also in China, it's not just violent criminals. They are prisoners of conscience. And once we get away from our republic, we will have like a mob rule, and the prison will fill up quickly. And that time, it's not criminals. It's people who committed thought crimes.
All right, so with that, let's bring it back in New York City DSA co-chair Grace Mauser to join us with this conversation and to address what you both have said. Grace, you just heard from Alina and Xi. They're both still with us on the show. How would you convince them that your style of socialism in America would be different than their experiences in Cuba and China that they see happening now and the echoes of the platform that they're very familiar with?
Well, I'm certainly not sure I can convince them in the next few minutes, and I really want to respect the experiences that they've gone through. But the difference to me is really our emphasis on democracy. If the majority of Americans are not interested in these policies, they will not be enacted. And the majority of Americans right now aren't yet. So we don't have anything close to socialism, and we don't have anything close to what we're talking about. But more and more Americans are interested in it, and the way that they're expressing that is in the ballot box. And we are extremely committed to doing that. We are interested in achieving a path that's closer to something that Denmark or Norway has gone through, where they have had a political revolution through the ballot box rather than something like what China or Cuba has gone through.
Alina, what is your response to what Grace has just said?
I will highly recommend to establish scholarships for your people to go to live in China for at least 3 to 6 months, and in Cuba to learn really what that system is able to give for a future. It will be very educational.
G, as a follow-up to... Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say that when you put whatever adjectives in front of communism or in front of socialism, it doesn't change its nature. It is still communism, it's still socialism. And you can say, oh, the people want free stuff. Let's just have free stuff. Remember, this country is built as a constitutional republic. Just because you and your friends want free stuff, and then we can just get free stuff. That's communism. And that never work out. Eventually, in communism, things will run out quick enough so everybody ends with nothing. And I was there, lived through it. So young people like you, please read some history, learn history.
I would love to respond to that with some examples of this free stuff we're talking about. Public education, public schools are free to Americans. We want to extend that to younger children. Things like Social Security is a benefit that all Americans have paid into, and many people like that. Medicare and Medicaid, we believe that that program should be extended not just to the elderly and the low income, but the middle class and working class as well. These programs are actually already part of American lives, and Americans really like them. And I think would support across the political spectrum, support the idea of them being expanded.
All right, I just want to ask a follow-up question, Grace, about something you said about Denmark going to, getting structured like a European, quote, socialist country rather than a Chinese communist style or Cuba. You have all these conferences around the country, one of them being in Silicon Valley at the DSA conference. You have posters that show socialists that you guys look up to. One of them is Assata Shakur, who murdered a New Jersey state police officer and fled to Cuba. She did that in the 1970s. Then you have also Che Guevara, who was Argentinian, helped Fidel Castro establish his regime and oversaw executions. So why is it that the DSA is endorsing these kinds of quote socialists rather than, I don't see much about Denmark in the material you guys are handing out or in your platform?
I'm so sorry, I actually don't know what you're talking about because in our DSA office, we don't have any of those posters, so I'm not sure I'm able to respond to the question you're asking.
Okay, well, people can see it on your DSA website. Go ahead.
Can I say something too?
About education? We poured so much money in public education, and it failed miserably. Look at what happened in Baltimore. We have so much money there, and not one student passed the examination. And it's not like we don't have enough money there. And for education, my question is, the money never solved the problem. So, and you want to expand that failure model to younger kids? No way.
All right.
Can I say something? I would like to say, Grace, that I think we should approach positions because I think we can learn from each other instead of being in opposite ends of the vision for a better future.
Absolutely.
I think that's good advice. All right, Alina Fernandez Revuelta, G. Van Fleet, and Grace Mauser, thank you all for joining me. Great to see you. All right, and now we're going to hear from former members of the Democratic Socialists of America about why they left the movement. Joining me now, Jake Altman. He's the author of the book Socialism Before Sanders and spent years as a DSA member. And Father Robert Circio, who is now a Catholic priest but spent years as a socialist activist. Great to see you both. So, Jake, you were a member of the DSA since the 15 years ago, 2010s. What initially drew you to the movement, and why did you leave?
I had been involved in the labor movement and had interacted with some other groups on the left that were at the time more extreme than DSA. And I was looking to, work in a productive way with a group on the left to be pragmatic and build something tangible. DSA appealed to me at that time. I can say the organization has changed dramatically since I first joined.
And how has it changed?
We've seen, even going back to 2015, I raised concerns about the direction of the organization. There were young members who were very interested in working with extremist groups on the left, Leninist groups. I can remember I was asked to do a debate. I raised concerns to a national leader. I said, I might not be the right person. I see the direction the organization is headed in. Are you sure I should be the one representing the organization? And at the time I was told, yes, Jake, we agree with you. It's just a few people clustered around Jacobin magazine.
Okay, interesting.
Fast forward to today, I think we see now, looking at DSA, there are all kinds of communist caucuses in the organization.
Do you think they're being honest about their democratic socialism, or are they just using that as a nice way to say the things that they can't really get away with publicly because the American public is not there yet?
I think there's a whitewash campaign underway to say this is nice, cozy Scandinavian social democracy when it is not.
Father, you worked inside a number of these campaigns. What is your perspective on why you decided to leave DSA and where it is now?
Well, I go back to the New Left days in the early 70s. I worked with Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden in the Campaign for Economic Democracy. Was somewhat involved in the farm workers movement, the gay movement, the beginnings of the gay movement, the beginnings of the feminist movement, the tail end of the Vietnam War protests.
Real liberalism, it sounds.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it is how much has not changed. The conversation that I listened to with the DSA members was very similar to the kind of dynamics and debates we were having in our collective discussions at the time. The more radical members and the more moderate members and those in between who hadn't quite made up their minds. I think there was a telling line from Grace when she said, well, he's just a shock jock, but we're very grateful for the thousands of young people who have been attracted to that. That's the point, that when you speak in those terms, those are the kinds of people that you are drawing. And if the leadership of the organization cannot moderate that kind of language, that kind of attitude, then what ends up happening is the democracy that you had in France with the French Revolution, which was in effect a socialist manifestation of the Enlightenment. I don't think that it has to be that way, but that's the way it works out. Power tends to corrupt. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, Lord Acton said, who was an observer of the French revolutions that went on. And what convinced me ultimately and drew me back to my own faith, which I had abandoned about that time, was a deeper understanding of what private property was and its connection not just to material things, but to the life, the effort, the intelligence, the capacity of the human person who puts his or her life into mixing labor with the world, with the material world, and producing profits which serve other people. They are right to complain about the state of society today, because we hardly have a free market. Those were good examples of socialist or socialist forms of organization, Social Security or Medicare or public schools. Not that we don't care about the well-being of people. We are concerned about the security, the social security of people. We're concerned about the education of people. But look at each of those bureaucratic institutions and how they fail to achieve the very object that they claim to be oriented toward. Right. That's what socialism does. It's filled with good intentions, but it ends up in horrendous misery, as we heard from the two ladies from China and Cuba, both countries that I visited in. And I can tell you and confirm in my conversations, and several times in both of those countries, that there are whole bodies of people there who want to get out. I think the proof of it is that we build borders to protect our nation. They build borders to keep people in. That should say it all.
Absolutely. I mean, people are dying to get to America, not dying to get into communist, socialist regimes like Cuba and China. Jake, last question to you. Of course, DSA is very organized. We talked about the numbers of members. They've exploded over 120,000. They love the platform that someone like Hassan Piker has with thousands of young people. So what is the way to beat back these bad ideas since they're gaining political power in all of these primaries?
I think doing what we're doing right here, exposing the ideas, and then also out-organizing them. They are in the Democratic Party now. They are in the labor movement now. It's a very, very serious concern. There really are hardcore communists in this organization. They control the governing board. They're at war themselves inside the organization. The New York City DSA and the rest of DSA is at war over the AOC endorsement. I mean, by exposing this, we are doing good work.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming on, Jake Altman and Father Sirico. Thank you very much for joining us tonight with your perspective. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, coming up, we're led to believe that American socialism is an organic grassroots movement funded by the young and disenfranchised. But is it really? NewsNation's Rich McHugh followed the money, and it led to some pretty powerful people. Today's leading DSA candidates pride themselves on the fact they can't be bought and that they are a result of grassroots and a movement of young people who want to change the country. But that's not the full story. In fact, there's evidence that powerful billionaires may be pumping money into the DSA machine. NewsNation investigative correspondent Rich McHugh took a closer look.
One thing I learned through all of this reporting is that, the established Democrats and Republicans have always had funding over a DSA and progressives. And the DSA figured out, finally, how to professionally fundraise. And that's we think of it as the DSA, just the DSA. But as Evan Barker says, it's not just them. It's all these groups have decided to come together for their own good. And that's why we're seeing all these victories across the country at this moment. Katie?
Well, fascinating. Rich McHugh, you're the best person we could have do that investigation. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we followed the money. We've heard from DSA leaders and defectors. We've even heard from survivors of socialist and communist regimes. After the break, we'll hear from current supporters of this movement. What are they so mad about, and what do they want to change? We'll ask them right after this. Welcome back. Well, despite everything you've heard so far, tens of thousands of Americans are still members of the Democratic Socialists of America. It's been a wake-up call for Democrats, and according to Vice President Vance, it's a wake-up call for Republicans, too. Listen. So what are these problems, and what are drawing voters to socialism? Joining us now, Nathan J. Robinson, current affairs editor-in-chief, and Monty Mader, progressive political commentator. Great to see you both. So, Nathan, you told our producers that you don't have any DSA members to vote for in Louisiana, and you wouldn't call yourself a DSA voter, but you definitely say you're a socialist and are sympathetic to the DSA platform. So what about them is interesting to you?
I wrote a book called Why You Should Be a Socialist. So,
why should we be socialists? Tell me.
Well, you asked what the problems are, why people are upset, and J.D. Vance actually gets some of it there. I interviewed Mem Downey when he was running early, and he said he talked to New Yorkers and listened to their anger. Some of the things people are mad about. The rent is too high. Young people feel like they can't afford a house. They'll never buy a house. Cost of childcare is too high. They see a bloated military budget deploying our tax dollars for death and destruction. They see their jobs being replaced with AI. They feel they have no rights at their place of employment. They have no family leave. they're drowning in student debt, billions of dollars are being spent for ICE to drag your neighbors away, throw them in a cage, or shoot them in their car. Then we have a totally out of control climate catastrophe with global warming spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, trillionaires are being minted while people are sleeping in the streets. And so a lot of young people look at that situation, they see it as crazy and unjust, they're angry, and they want someone to do something about it.
All right, that's a long list of very serious problems, many that young people have gone through in generations past, I might add, but there are some new ones, and I understand the AI questions for sure. We cover that a lot on this show. But Monty, you're not a card-carrying member of DSA, but you also support many of their policies. Why are you interested in what they have to offer, and what problems do you see that they're solving, or at least claiming that they're going to solve?
I think that democratic socialism operates as a guardrail to where capitalism fails. We've seen over the past year where we have watched tax law favor the wealthiest among us instead of the working and lower class, who it should fail. We have so many systems in our country that are not working, one of them being healthcare. We spend more per person than any other developed nation, and we have the worst health outcomes, including infant death and life expectancy and preventable disease. We can do better. I believe that they address the income equality while also saying, hey, we can do better by the numbers. We can actually make this better for everybody, not just the few. Because I see it as a guardrail to the greed and the inequality we're seeing everywhere by implementing programs that allow for us to get something for our taxes. I don't believe that American money should be going overseas when Americans need help here. Our tax dollars can help us here. We don't have a money problem. We have a priority problem, and a lot of people in the U.S. are suffering, and that money needs to stay here. Voters need to have more say in where their tax dollars go, and tax law should always favor the lower and the middle class.
Well, I would agree with you that I would like better stewardship of my tax dollars, absolutely. But Nathan, we hear a lot about the billionaires. One of our reporters just detailed how billionaires are actually dumping money into the DSA when it's saying it's this grassroots movement. So are there like good billionaires as long as they're, donating to socialist causes, whereas Elon Musk, who's a trillionaire but created thousands of millionaires when SpaceX went public, is evil and one who should be taxed to death?
Well, I mean, that's the report that you had really overstates the number of rich people who support these kinds of policies. It's actually very difficult to fundraise on the left. And in that report, you heard that the DSA's budget is actually $6 million. It's tiny. And what you didn't do in that report is you didn't compare DSA spending to corporate and other PAC spending. And if you start looking at that, you'll start to see that they're outspent like 50 to 1. If you look at the billionaires who donated to Cuomo, yeah, you find one eccentric rich person here and there. But Mamdani was massively outspent by the rich. They poured money, and around the country, you see this. We're seeing this in the Michigan Senate race right now, where Abdul El-Sayed is being outspent 50 to 1 by AIPAC. They're spending $50 million. So you got to do the comparison if you're going to have a real analysis of who's funded by the rich.
All right, Monty, there has been this debate too within DSA and promotion of groups that have been sanctioned by the U.S. government for terrorism, Hamas, for example. Is that a group that you support, or is that an outlier in terms of what DSA is pushing?
There is absolutely no promotion of Hamas. There is a defense of the Palestinian people to be able to live and survive. Because what you cannot have is a war with a region that does not have a standing army. When you are attacking hospitals and schools and you are intentionally targeting civilians, you're not defending yourself. You're also not targeting a terrorist group. You're targeting civilians. I'm talking about the nation state of Israel doing that. There is no movement within the DSA to support Hamas, but it is to defend the civilians in Palestine, to defend their right to live and live freely, and to prevent settlement and abuse in the West Bank. It's a legal apartheid and a genocide that's going on, and that's not just my opinion. That also includes the International Criminal Court.
I think we can have you back to debate
that does not have a standing army.
Those facts. I think a lot of those are opinions, but we are happy to have you.
They're the consensus
Nathan
of
and
human
Monty,
rights groups around the world.
Thank you
There
very
are
much for being
reasons that
here
there are people
today.
in Israel facing war
We'll
crime
be right back.
charges.
Thank
Not
you,
my
guys.
opinion.
Thank you very much. We got to run. Good to see you both. Thank you very much. More Katie Pavlich Tonight after this. Thank you for tuning in for our special on Democratic Socialists of America. Let's bring in Jesse Weber. Jesse, we covered a lot tonight. Are you going to be the next card-carrying member of DSA?
No, I can't say I was convinced. I will say it was a great show, really important conversations, very well done. I told Alex about that too.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jesse, and have a great show. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good seeing you.